Imagine Kerala's long coastline. The waves come and go, sometimes calm, sometimes rough. For years, the BJP's political tide barely touched the shore, just a splash here and there. In all these years, just one MLA and one MP. But lately, the waves have begun to change direction. There's no storm or flood, but a steady shift in currents. Kerala is often held up as an example for its secular model. It's a state where communities have lived side by side for centuries and where secular values are woven into everyday life. Religion is a part of daily life here, but it's rarely expressed through aggressive political mobilization. And for decades, that unique culture kept the BJP at arm's length. But it's all changing. While the BJP seat count has stayed close to zero, its vote share has been increasing. We saw it in 2024 in Thrissur, where actor-politician Suresh Gopi won. We also saw it in Thiruvananthapuram and Alappuzha, where BJP's vote share climbed significantly. These aren't giant waves, but unmistakable ripples. And it's being shaped by many factors: national politics, local grievances, economic pressures, and identity anxieties. And finally, the layered, patient work of the Sangh Parivar. So what made Kerala different so far? And what's changing now? Let me explain. Kerala will see assembly elections next year, and you will be flooded with news coverage on the elections. Many journalists will be parachuted into the state as well. But here's the problem. Election coverage today is a spectator sport, centered on who's winning and who's losing, and a stream of shallow polls and loud debates. Ground reports often stop at quick voter reactions, while politicians get space to repeat scripted promises and even falsehoods. Much of it mirrors party narratives. That is PR and not journalism. The News Minute believes political reporting should inform and not entertain. We focus on the why and how, and not just the what. We dig deeper, question assumptions, and explain the forces shaping states like Kerala. If you value the journalism that we bring to you, journalism that goes beyond surface, then do support us. Support me and my team by scanning the QR code on your screen, and you can contribute any amount of your choice. You can also support our meaningful political reporting by becoming subscribers of the News Minute. To understand the Sangh strategy in Kerala, you have to start with something simple. The BJP may think in elections, but the RSS thinks in decades. Their organizational work in Kerala began in the 1940s, around the same time the communist movement took shape here. Though it's definitely not as successful as the communists, the Sangh built density with shakas, student groups, temple committees, volunteer networks, and social service units. There's a popular myth that says that Kerala has the highest number of RSS shakas in the country. Ullekh NP, a journalist who studied the organization closely, says that's not accurate. The RSS defines a state or a kshetra very differently. There are a total of 52 kshetra according to the RSS. So while bigger states like UP or Gujarat will be split into multiple states, Kerala is seen as one kshetra. Which is why it seems that it has the largest number of shakas. But Kerala does have a high density of shakas relative to its size. And that density gives disproportionate influence, not in votes, but in daily presence. And that's the key. While the BJP struggles to win elections, the Sangh is building something slower and something more subtle. A cultural atmosphere, a Hindu atmosphere, as scholars Dayal Paleri and R. Santosh put it. Their argument is blunt, that this isn't a side project. Their cultural groundwork is the political project. One way this unfolds is through festivals. Take this case study we did from Ottapalam, a small town in Palakkad district. Not long ago, it didn't have a grand public Ganeshotsavam or Vinayaka Chaturthi celebrations. Then, after a local incident that involved the police blocking a procession, RSS workers responded by organizing the town's first Ganeshotsavam in 2012. It began small, with 22 idols in 21 locations. Today, it has 250 idols across 136 spots. DJ processions, film star speeches on Hindu pride and large crowds. The Ottapalam Ganeshotsavam committee is entirely run by the RSS. But the event is branded as a cultural festival. It appears apolitical, but it's really the place for consolidation. And this is only one layer of the Sangh's work. Another layer is the slow entry into spaces that shape daily lives through cooperative societies, local unions, temple boards, and neighborhood committees. These organizations aren't glamorous, but they control loans, charity, mediations, local development funds, and community legitimacy. Ullekh points out that gaining a foothold in cooperatives has been one of Sangh's long-term goals in Kerala. Why? Because these institutions hold enormous soft power. The CPIM has had control over such banks for decades, and now the Sangh is going the exact same route. The transformation isn't only happening in institutions, it's happening inside communities. Now let's imagine a big village fair. In one lane, young boys love a flashy performer who talks about strength, pride, and bravery. In another lane, people stand around complaining about how local organizer messed up last year's fair. Their old grudges and frustrations color everything they see. And in some pockets, powerful community elders show up, and just one single comment from any of them changes the entire group's mood. So the fair doesn't move in one direction. Now use this example for the Sangh and its work in Kerala. Some young people are drawn to the ideas of masculinity, pride, and assertiveness. Local anger, on the other side, makes some drift towards promises of the BJP. And in some pockets, influential caste-based organizations like the NSS or the SNDP Yogam hold the sway. Let's take the example of Alappuzha. My colleague Harita John's ground report there found traditional CPIM voters, many of them from the Eelawa community, felt ignored, humiliated, or frustrated with local leaders. In the 2024 general elections, BJP's vote share there jumped from 17% to 28%. In some panchayats, they even overtook the CPIM. Of course, this was not a massive wave, but the cracks in the old loyalties are clearly visible there. The Christians in Kerala, who form around 18% of the population, are mostly driven by anxiety, especially around interfaith relationships and the love jihad narrative. Now, this anxiety or even hatred against Muslims has been circulating for many years now through parish meetings, Christian TV channels, and increasingly hardline church statements. The News Minutes reporting from the settler belts of Kasaragod and Kannur shows exactly how this gets politicized. A Christian girl and a Muslim boy fall in love, and what might have once been a private family issue suddenly becomes a political event. The BJP's Minority Morcha arrives. Right-wing Christian groups appear. WhatsApp forwards circulate and parents feel cornered. And many begin to feel that it's only the BJP that speaks openly about these fears. The party builds on this through initiatives like Sneha Yatra, which are house visits during Christmas and Easter, and Modi Mitra, which gives soft supporters a non-political entry point. Influential Christian households receive home visits, polite conversations, and Christmas greetings. People say, "We won't vote for you, not just yet, but thank you for coming." Now, this may not be electoral conversion, but it's emotional alignment. And then there are flashpoint incidents that accelerate the shift, like what happened in Pune, where a group of Muslim schoolboys accidentally injured a vicar while driving through church grounds. The incident spiraled into a full-blown communal crisis. Christian right-wing channels framed it as a jihadi attack. And this caused communal rhetoric to spread across parishes in Kottayam, Idukki, and Thrissur. As Ullekh puts it, polarization is becoming cyclical. But all of this brings us to the question that matters the most. If the Sangh has been working in Kerala since the 1940s, if its networks are dense, And if its cultural presence has grown, why hasn't this translated into votes? Why does Kerala keep the BJP at arm's distance? The answer is simple. It's geographical. Kerala is small but extremely dense. People live close, communities often overlap. Religious diversity isn't abstract here. It's your neighbor, your colleague, your classmate, your bus conductor, and your local shopkeeper. When identities intertwine at that level, polarization becomes harder to sustain. But the more important answer is political culture. Kerala's electorate doesn't respond well to big emotional waves or majoritarian rhetoric. It responds better to welfare delivery, organizational discipline, ideological clarity, and local leadership. On all these fronts, the left and the Congress, despite all their flaws, still have deeper roots than the BJP does in Kerala. The CPIM especially is not like its Bengal counterpart. As Ullekh explains, the CPIM in Bengal decayed from within with corruption, defection and the collapse of cadre systems. Mamata Banerjee and the Trinamool Congress stepped in, pushed the Congress aside and quickly became the main rival to the left. This created a bitter two-way fight, and once the Congress was pushed to the margins, the BJP found an opening. Kerala did not offer anything similar. Unlike Bengal, Kerala does not carry historic communal wounds. And also, its two main coalitions have remained strong and competitive. Even student politics showed this balance, with groups like SFI, KSU, and various Muslim student organizations all holding their own spaces. And most importantly, Kerala's CPIM hasn't collapsed like in Bengal. Its structure remains intact and it acts like a firewall. Other than the CPIM and Congress, many other political parties function largely as the satellites. In addition, the Congress in Kerala has often sided with soft Hindutva, keeping the BJP in its margins. So for those who are tired with the CPIM or do not agree with its politics, there's always the Congress, a natural, familiar alternative. Then there's the point of literacy. Not as a boast or a moral claim, but as a lived habit. Kerala's voters are known to read newspapers across political lines. Many of them debate and cross-check, and even fact-check TV anchors in real time. This doesn't mean people don't hold prejudices. We've seen Islamophobia grow and communal rhetoric seep into all kinds of spaces. But Kerala's voters still don't automatically convert cultural anxieties into votes for the BJP. They compartmentalize. They may agree with the bishop on love jihad, or admire a BJP leader's personal style, or feel frustrated with the left on pensions or governance, but still go into the polling booth and vote the way they always have. Adding to this is the BJP's local leadership, which remains fragmented with no deep bench like they have in Karnataka, Maharashtra, or even Gujarat. Many leaders are parachuted and they lack on-ground legitimacy. Many are celebrities and not organizers. The party's ideological messaging often clashes with Kerala's everyday lived secularism. And that's why the Sangh and not the BJP is driving the Kerala project. Because the Sangh understands that electoral change will not come quickly in a state like Kerala, where caste and religion don't map neatly onto party lines and minorities form nearly half of the population. Which is why, as scholars Dayal and R. Santosh argue, they are willing to put elections on the back burner and focus on cultural work, that long, patient effort to build a Hindu atmosphere, an atmosphere that will eventually make electoral victories possible. Now, before I go, as I always keep reminding you, don't forget to become a subscriber of the News Minute and News Laundry. I know it's the end of the year and you all have plans, you're probably traveling or just trying to spend time with family, but do keep us in mind because our work doesn't stop. It's relentless. And also a reminder for you to tune into the News Minute to catch all the developments as the court will give its verdict in the Kerala actor assault case on December 8th. Make sure that over the weekend you catch up on all the stories that we've written. We've followed the case from the beginning in 2017, and on the day of verdict, we will be there breaking down what the judgment is.